So let's get started. We've been talking about fractional pieces. I'm going to sketch out two rectangles, keeping it pretty simple. The one, as you can see right here, I have two equal pieces. One is filled in, so we know that fraction is 1/2. And over here on the right, I'm going to draw the same size rectangle, except in this case, I'm not going to split this one into two equal pieces. I'm going to split this one into 4 equal pieces. And in this case, I'm going to shade in 2 of these boxes. So this fraction, as you should know, there are 4 equal pieces, so 4 is my denominator. 2 are shaded in, so there are 2 pieces we're talking about. That one would be 2/4. And if you look closely at the picture, you should see that the blue shaded area on the left is in fact the same size as the blue shaded area on the right. That means 1/2 is equal to 2/4. That part we already know. Today we're going to get into developing a rule to figure out any fraction equivalency. So if you had something like maybe 3/5, you'll be able to figure out a rule very quickly and easily so that you could write equivalent fractions like 6/10, which would be equivalent, or maybe the fraction 9/15, which would also be equivalent. So today we're going to get into a rule. I'll show you it very quickly. And the rule starts with this idea that any number, 3 times the whole number 1, would equal 3. Now that's something you probably learned way back in maybe first grade, maybe second grade. 3 times 1 is 3. Any number times 1 is going to give you the number itself. So instead of thinking of it as multiplying by the whole number 1, we can put a fraction in there and we would still get the same thing. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And this time I'm going to change to a fraction. I'm going to say, we'll go with the fraction of 1/2. We've been using that a lot. 1/2 times the whole number 1 would be, yes, 1/2. We just said anything times the whole number 1 would be 1/2. But what if instead of the whole number 1, I did 1/2 times, let's say, the fraction 2/2? Because we talked earlier that 2/2 here, that is the same as multiplying by a gigantic whole number 1. 1/2 times 2/2 would be the same thing as 1/2. It's just going to look a bit different. So you multiply the numerators, 1 times 2, and you'll get 2. And you multiply the denominators, 2 times 2, and you get 4. And I'm pretty sure we just decided on the previous screen that 1/2 is in fact equal to 2/4. Let's see that again with a different fraction. This time let's start with, we'll go with 3/4. Right? 3/4 times the whole number 1. So I'm going to sketch out my whole number 1 here. Right? 3/4 times the whole number 1, but instead of the whole number 1, I'm going to put a fraction in it that would be equal to the whole number 1. This time I'm going to use 3/3, because 3/3 would be a whole. If we multiply 3/4 times the whole number 1, or 3/3, it will give us an equivalent fraction. So let's see what we would get. Numerator, 3 times 3, I get 9. Denominator, 4 times 3, I get 12. 3/4 is indeed equal to 9/12. So sometimes during the lesson, I may refer to this whole number 1 as my friend Juan. And yes, that is a little bit of a joke, because Juan is a Spanish name for how you would say John, except I use it as a little bit of a play on words, and I say, well, multiply by my friend Juan, which means the whole number 1, or a fraction that would be equal to the whole number 1. Let me show you one more. This time we'll do a rare fraction. Let's use 4/7 times the whole number 1, but in this case I'm not going to even write the 1 in. I'm just going to use 2/2, because that is the same as the whole number 1. Multiply the numerators, 4 times 2 equals 8. Multiply the denominators, 4 times 2, or I'm sorry, 7 times 2, that would be 14. 4/7 is in fact equal or equivalent to 8/14. The same thing would hold true if you want to divide, as long as you're dividing by the whole number 1. So if we start with a fraction, this time we'll use 8/24. And I want to find an equivalent fraction, but I want to have an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of, in this case, let's say 6. So we have to figure out what number can we divide 24 by to get 6, and it would have to then be the same number that we can divide by 8. So this is where you need to really think of your multiples and think of factors, because this will help. We need a number that's going to be a factor of 8 and 24. And in this case, 4 would work, because 24 divided by 4 equals 6. 8 divided by 4 equals 2. 8 24ths would be equivalent to 2 6ths. I'm going to give you one. See if you can solve it yourself. Let's start with 3 7ths. And I want you to write an equivalent fraction for me that has a 14 in the denominator. So think of the rule. Think of multiplying by 1, but don't use the whole number 1. Put a number in there that would be a fraction equal to the whole number 1. Pause the video. You could write this one down. See if you can figure out what the answer is, and I'll show it to you in a second. Okay, you had a chance to pause. You probably realize by now that 7 times 2 would give you 14. And as long as you do the same thing to the numerator, 2 halves would be just like multiplying by 1. 3 times 2 is 6, so 3 7ths would equal 6 14ths. Now you have a rule. This would work for any fraction you encounter, and you could multiply that same fraction, 3 7ths, you could multiply it by 3 thirds. And in that case, you would end up with 3 times 3 is 9 in the numerator, 7 times 3, 21 in the denominator. 9 21sts is equal to 6 14ths, which is also equal to 3 7ths. See you guys in a bit.